How you doing, folks? Yours truly, Randy Rand, and welcome to another edition of today's talk. Today, we spoke with Dr. Stephen Peters. He's the superintendent of schools for Lorenz 55 School District in Central South Carolina. He's also a member of the board of directors for the International Literacy Association. He's also the founder of the Gentlemen and Ladies Clubs program. This program was featured on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and he's also the CEO and president of the Peters Group, a national education consulting company. Today's interview was geared around, or we talked about the article, What Can Schools Do to Address Poverty? And in doing the interview, I started, asking Dr. Peters, just about himself and just to explain, his experience and tell us about his experience. And he's very well versed, very well experienced in turning around schools that are low achieving and underperforming. And he's turned them around to be the top of their class, top of their district, with regards to his progress that he made with the students. He's also been featured by the British Broadcasting Corporation about the work that he's done at his school, and we're going to be getting behind that and promoting it as much as possible. He's a God-fearing man, and he gives all glory to God for his progress and his process. It's a great interview. And you can also look forward to us interviewing him more down the road, talking about what he's doing and what he's up to. Okay? Enjoy the interview, and thanks for the time. And we're back. Yours truly, Randy Rand here, and welcome to another edition of today's talk. We are so glad to have with us today Dr. Stephen Peters. He's the superintendent of schools for Lorenz 55 School District in South Carolina. He's a member of the board of directors for the International Literacy Association. He's also the founder of the Gentlemen and Ladies Club programs. This program was also featured on the Oprah Winfrey Show. And he's the CEO and president of the Peters Group, a national education consulting company. Dr. Peters, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's good to be with you.
If you could please introduce yourself to Westchester and Rockland counties.
Well, hello, Westchester and Rockland counties. Good to be with you tonight on this interview talking about something that's so important, that's public education in America. I've been in education for 36 years, started as a teacher, and became an assistant principal of one of the worst schools in our district in Norfolk, Virginia, and we became a national Blue Ribbon school within 1 year. And then I was promoted to the largest middle school in our school district, and in 3 years that school became a state Blue Ribbon school. And so I've been a principal, assistant principal, director of secondary education, director of human resources, and now superintendent of schools for Lawrence County School District 55 in Central South Carolina. So I've worked at every level in a public school system, and am excited about being the leader during such a time as this, because we need to make sure that no child is left out, and that is our theme going into this school year. Educating children during this time is critical, and we can no longer settle for one-size-fits-all school districts. We need to truly learn how to create conditions for sustainable success for all children, regardless of their zip code or socioeconomic background.
I thoroughly agree. It's so refreshing to hear you say that, because and you mentioned in times like these, education is so very vital. It's downright life-threatening if these children are not educated properly. Now, you wrote the book, Choosing to Believe, Creating a Framework for School Success. It won the USA Books Award in 2010 in the K-12 category. Please tell us about the winning content in the book that enabled it to win such a prestigious award.
Well, before I do that, I have to first give credit to my co-author, who is the other Dr. Peters, Dr. Angela Peters, who is really the smart person in our family. So, it's a good combination that God brought together. I am focused on K-12 public education. My wife is the first female and the first minority to win Professor of the Year in the state of South Carolina. First minority, first female Professor of the Year. Now she's the vice provost of the #1 HBCU in the nation, Claflin University.
Wow.
So she is my co-author of Choosing to Believe. And it came on the heels of Do You Know Enough About Me to Teach Me? And then I followed Do You Know Enough About Me to Teach Me by Teaching to Capture and Inspire All Learners, which the first book, Do You Know Enough About Me to Teach Me, answered the question, who are these children? In many respects, our teachers and school leaders are shocked at the characteristics of today's students. They're so different from children we went to school with, but they have so many different factors that they face. And I wanted to appeal to the conscience of teachers that you have to know the students you're teaching, because it's impossible to teach a child that you don't know. No significant teaching and learning can take place without a significant relationship. So that book answered that question. And after that, we wanted to come back with specific strategies. Now that you know who these children are, what do you do with them in our schools day to day? 8 hours a day, sometimes 10 hours a day, 5, 6 days a week. What do we do with this population of children who face obstacles that we didn't face? And after we put those two books out, and people started using them all over the United States, and we started getting calls to come in and do specific staff development training, Angela and I decided now that we have teachers raising their consciousness about the capacity that they need in the classroom, we needed to also put together a framework for successful schools. And so that's why we wrote Choosing to Believe, creating a framework for school success. Because oftentimes educators are reaching, they're desperate for answers, and we didn't want to put a book out that was a one-size-fits-all system. It was a measure of creating a framework that you can customize the offerings that you have to your students. And I think that's why it won the award that it won, because, we talk about best practices in public education a lot.
Yes.
And oftentimes I am a true believer, my wife is as well, that best practices stop our search for better practice.
Okay.
So if you feel like you have the best, then you stop seeking better. We can't afford to do that in public education, especially the children that we're serving today. We have to constantly seek better on a daily basis.
Now, you were featured in a documentary by the British Broadcasting Company. The topic was about American high schools, and it was based on your leadership ability. In your opinion, what made you and your leadership ability stand out to make them want to do a documentary about you?
Well, first, I have to humbly say, to God be the glory.
Amen.
I believe strongly in John 3:30. He must increase, I must decrease. And I think that the work that I've been able to propel over the 36 years that I've been in public education is truly on the heels of blessings from God. I do believe that I am a gifted servant leader, that I've been chosen to lead and to lead a charge in times such as these. When I was growing up, I was supposed to be an NBA basketball player, but I popped my Achilles my senior year of college.
Ooh.
I never got drafted. I was a great basketball player, but never got drafted into the NBA. And I now see why, because God had other plans for me. I've had the ability to lead people because I've never been interested in creating followers. I've always been interested in developing more leaders. And I think people like to work with people like that.
Sure.
Where you are developing, you're empowering other people to operate at a level they're not accustomed to operating on. And I think that's what the BBC saw. They'd read my book. They've been following my work for about 10 years and decided that, when I decided to go back into the schools after 13 years of consulting around the country, speaking to millions of educators, I had a friend who was superintendent here in Orangeburg, South Carolina, and the principal of the largest high school here had a massive heart attack at 50 years old last year, and he died.
Oh.
And that is how tough this school is. And so she asked that, I come in and help, and I decided I would do it for a year, and I would go back into a school, back into this war, public education. Because oftentimes we talk about weapons of mass destruction. We are dealing with a generation of children that we need to be concerned also about weapons of mass distraction. And we don't need good people in schools. We need great people. And so I decided as a servant leader to give back to a state that gave me so much. I was born and raised in South Carolina. I feel like when we're blessed, become successful in life, we can't just keep going. We have to come back and give back so that other people can propel themselves into a different pathway as well. So that's what I decided to do. I talked it over with my wife and family and decided I would go back into the front lines of this war of public education. So I went back as a high school principal, as humble as that was, to go in and be a servant leader. And so the BBC decided to film everything from start to finish, from the beginning of the school year to graduation. So they just packed their gear up about 3 weeks ago and headed back to London to begin the editing process, which will take June, July, and August.
Yep.
And the documentary is scheduled for tentative release the end of September, first part of October. And then it will be a 3 to 4 part TV series shown on the BBC.
Well, I sure want to watch that, and certainly will do everything that I can to promote that myself.
Oh, good. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. What you're doing is a tremendous work, and I am thoroughly about our children becoming educated, and I'll talk to you a little later about that. But certainly, look forward to that. Certainly. Now, if you could, please give us some of your ideas on how you would or how you have battled poverty in your service of working with children.
I would say that this school that we're coming out of now is called OW. And instead of Orangeburg Wilkinson High School, we created a new brand for the school, and OW stood for Opportunities Waiting.
Okay.
And so we had to infuse a 3-step process to teaching and learning, and it's something I've branded about 20 years ago when I was a principal in the inner city. And it's, instead of teaching students first, you have to capture and inspire them first. So
yes,
we implemented a 3-step process: capture, inspire, then you get permission to teach. That is how powerful this new generation of learners are, that we need their permission to teach them. In addition to that, I think the most important element to offset the deficiencies that we face due to high poverty index schools is that we have to make sure that our organizational structures in our schools are aligned with the realities our children face. A lot of this work is done by a good friend of mine, Dr. Pedro Noguera, who's at NYU, who's now professor at UCLA. Pedro does an amazing job of talking about equity and access. And he also warns those of us who are in education who think we know what we're doing, that there is a difference between equity and equality. That one means that all children have a pair of shoes. The other means that every child has a pair that fits. And so, as simplistic as that seems, I think we need to do everything that we can to significantly reduce how complex this is. We need to come in at this problem of poverty to simplify the complexity as much as possible, and say that no child left out means that every child who comes through our doors every day needs to leave better than he or she came. This sacrifice that we made, and I say we because my family sacrificed as well, going into the school, I will tell you that I know we bought graduation caps and gowns. We bought invitations for students. We helped people rent houses because their ceilings fell in. So when you're talking about high poverty index, you're not just talking about dealing with the issues that come to the school. We have to often go out where these children are coming from to first understand the issue in and of itself. And so I customarily load teachers on buses, and instead of having faculty meetings the first part of the year, we load buses and we go to the homes, we go to the neighborhoods where our children come from, because I want them to literally see the doors that these children come out of in the morning, so that they understand, when I ask the question that my book poses, do you know enough about me to teach me? You need to understand the dynamics of what you're asking me to do, to come into a classroom, sit still, be quiet, when in fact my mom's been up at 2 and 3 in the morning crying, trying to figure out how she's going to put food on the table. And so these are real issues that very few people are talking about, because and oftentimes we've been trained to have dog and pony shows in public education and say, yeah, we're improving, student achievement is up. Well, the real deal is that we are facing significant issues, and very few people have the answers and solutions to the problems that we face in public education today. We need great people to come back and give back so that others can do better and be better.
That is incredibly deep. I've been interviewing people for quite a while now with regards to education, whether it's public education or education in urban America, inner city, or inner cities. And I don't know if I've ever heard of a principal, and I'm sure it's been done before, but I don't know if I've ever heard of where a principal will take his or her staff, the teachers and what, to the neighborhoods of the children.
Oh, absolutely.
And to the homes, and to see this is where these kids are coming from.
Right.
It's good to give lip service to it. It's good to talk
Right.
about it. But when you take them there,
right.
Whoa, that has got to make an incredible difference in how they look at these children once they come into these classrooms.
Well, they become ours, and our whole motto is I always ask teachers to deliver to other people's children the same level of quality they want delivered to their children by a teacher.
Yes.
And so when you deliver that, you don't have to worry about standardized test scores, because there's no way we're going to let our biological children fail. So why should we expect other people to accept a delivery of quality less than we are willing to accept for our own children? And so we need leaders in our schools who are courageous enough to understand that courage and fear, the two can't coexist. And you have to help them do that, and they have to see you doing it. If we talk about the dropout rate, well, if a child in South Carolina misses 10 days of consecutive school, then he or she is considered a dropout. Well, why you let it get to 10 days? And you'll see in the documentary, we had one kid get to 8 days. I jumped in my car, and I got the address from my secretary, and I went up in the hood to his house. And the next day, he was in school. I mean, all of this is captured and documented, and that's one of the reasons I agreed to do the documentary. We had cameras on us every day, and they filmed everything from fighting to making up to getting ready to take standardized tests to graduation to a child who has 3 kids, and I gave her her high school diploma May 28th. She has 3 children, and she's in high school, and she walked across that stage May 28th. And she had a support system around her the whole year. We would not let her fail, because for her, with 3 children, failure couldn't be an option.
No, it couldn't.
So we removed it. We removed failure.
Wow, you are to be commended. So commended for that. Oh, my God. We are speaking with Dr. Stephen Peters. He's the superintendent of schools for Lorenz 55 School District in Central South Carolina. He's a member of the board of directors for the International Literacy Association. He's the founder of the Gentlemen's and Ladies Club programs, which was a program that was featured on the Oprah Winfrey Show. And he's also the CEO and president of the Peters Group, which is a national education consulting company. And he's very good and kind enough to give us some of his very valuable time. To your best ability, if you could speak to what are some of the contributing factors to the poverty our children face on a daily basis?
It's such an amazing and appropriate and relevant question. To, I think, really summarize in lay terms and quickly, if we look at the research that I use for Do You Know Enough About Me to Teach Me, we looked at 5 major influences on school-age children in America. And those 5 major influences are home, school, church, peers, and television. And in the late 1950s, home was the number 1 influence on all children in America, followed by school and church. Those were the top 3 influences on children in America. And so very few children failed because what they learned at home was reinforced in school and in church. And for many of us, I was born in the late 1950s, my teachers lived in my neighborhood.
Yes.
So education for us was personal. And so I am the youngest of 6 children, growing up at 329 Springwood Drive in Walterboro, South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have much money, but in our house, my mother and father subscribed to the belief that nobody rises to low expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, when you turn 18, you have to go. That was a clear expectation. So when we all turned 18, we all went.
Okay.
And we went to college.
Mm-hmm.
All 6 of us graduated college, 5 full scholarships.
Wow.
Right? Because of expectation.
Yes.
So I wrote that chapter in my book, Do You Know Enough About Me to Teach Me, entitled Nobody Rises to Low Expectations. And so when we look at the dynamics of those 5 major influences, over time, they change. So when you look at the 1980s, peer influence went from 4th to 2nd. Television went from last to 3rd. And then the 1990s, peer influence became the number 1 influence on all children in America. Why? Because in the late 1980s, divorce was happening at a rapid pace.
Yes.
Where mother and father were separating and divorcing, children lost their security. They lost the stability. So what did they do? They turned from dependence on adults to each other. That's when students started joining gangs. And peer influence became the number 1 influence on children in America. So, brother, today, the number 1 influence on children in America is television, multimedia influence, social media. Mm-hmm. And then you've got peer influence 2nd, and you've got church 3rd, right? And you've got home last. Home is the least of 5 major influences when, in fact, when I first started telling you this, home was the number 1 influence. When children lost their sense of security, they lost family. A family is no longer considered the nucleus of mother and father like many of us knew when we were growing up. My father, I just picked up from my sister who's going on vacation. My father will be 92 years old.
Oh, God bless him. God bless him.
Yes, he's sitting right in the other room right now, and all he looks at me and he's like, "Boy, I sure am proud of you. Boy, I wish your mama could see you now." Boy.
Amen.
You know, because this is what they developed.
Yes.
This is what they expected. But for many of the children that I had at OW this year, 98.6% African American children, high poverty index, an academically deficient school. And so what I wanted to do as a leader of that school is to make it an academic powerhouse like it was an athletic powerhouse. And so we set out to make change happen in 1 year, and we did. And it's going to be such a significant contribution to public education. It was a lot of hard work to put a mic on every morning, 6:30, 6:45 in the morning, and sometimes get home at 10 o'clock at night. You know, I worked 14, 15 hours a day, but I did it on behalf of children who needed me to do it.
Gotcha.
So that they would have a different lifeline, a different pathway. I got a text message from a young boy yesterday. He's a rising senior. So, the mere fact that they have my cell phone number should speak volumes to you.
Yes.
Yes. He texted me and he said, "Dr. Peters, can I ask you a question?" And I tweeted this out because I wanted people who follow me on Twitter to understand the significance of relationships and trust. And he said to me, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Of course." He said, "What propelled your latest success? how did you get here? And so, of course, to God be the glory, my relationship with God, I always take advantage of an opportunity to serve as a witness, because when we start taking credit for being who we are, we're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And I see it happen often. Ego means you're edging God out. So I try as often as I can to humble myself and understand the reason I am where I am is because God put me here. And children need to know that. But I try not to speak it in words often. I try to show it in my actions. And I think they feel the spirit of people who are around them. Mm-hmm. This child certainly did. And so I answered this text, and he says, I don't have anybody at home. The only person I have is my girlfriend, but I always find a way. And I said, well, brother, I believe that you are going to do great things in the world. And he said, do you really? I said, no, I know you will. And he said, well, what I want to do is I want my name to be Doctor, and he gave me his name. Mm-hmm. And so I started from that point forward calling him Doctor and his last name.
Speaking it into existence, yes.
I texted him this morning. I said, good morning, Doctor, because you're planting a seed in the spirit of a child.
Yes.
And so today he sent me his senior class schedule. And he said, Doc, what do you think about my schedule? What do you think about the classes I'm designed to take? And so I put him in touch with a senior counselor, gave him her cell phone number, her email. That's education, bro. Mm-hmm. That's education. Mm-hmm. Because now I know beyond a shadow of doubt that not only will this child be successful and pursue and obtain his PhD in whatever area or discipline he so chooses, but I know that he will pay it back, that he'll bring others along with him. And that's what education is.
Dr. Peters, in your opinion, is there a market failure, say where demand outweighs supply when it comes to educating our children? Please explain.
Well, I think we're in a situation right now where we have allowed parents to be consumers of public education versus partners in education. I think we've let a lot of parents off the hook. I think we've allowed them to do drive-bys on our schools. Mm-hmm. And by that I mean drive-by, drop your child off, and expect schools to not only educate children, but also raise them.
Yeah.
And we also have a short list supply of courageous leaders in our schools who truly understand the difference between effective leadership and organizational management. We have too many principals managing schools, knowing which key opens the auditorium. I will tell you right now, anybody asked me at OW where the key was to open the auditorium, I wouldn't be able to tell them because I'm too busy doing what I'm asking other people to do. Mm-hmm. And so, when we talk about supply and demand, I mean, that's the research, that's the resurgence right now of this choice model where people are saying, well, charter schools are the best way to go, or, charter schools are public schools. And so because you have a choice to go to a charter school, I mean, what I said to you earlier is we need to customize education. So if a charter school is what you think is best for your child, then that's what you choose. But I believe that those of us who are educated in the true public school experience, that we're able to go out into the world and do great things. You have schools that are successful and schools that aren't. But when we get down to the bottom line of what's happening in our schools, they are designed in a manner that schools were designed in the 1940s and the 1930s. You can't educate today's children in a system that was designed before the French Revolution. We have to change. We have to be innovative and creative in our approaches to what we supply and produce in our schools. And that's why I said, there was a law, No Child Left Behind. That's how ironic, that somebody would name a federal law, No Child Left Behind, when in fact the children I've been working with for 36 years were left behind the day they were born,
sure,
before they left the hospital.
Yep.
That's why we adopted No Child Left Out, because if you concentrate on every child and not leave any children out, then you're going to produce solid, effective schools that not only can, you're not going to stumble on success, you're going to become successful and do what's important. And the important thing is that you're able to sustain that success over a period of time. And it can happen. Common sense approaches are what works.
We are speaking to Dr. Stephen Peters. He is the superintendent of schools for Lorenz 55 School District in Central South Carolina. He's a member of the board of directors for the International Literacy Association. He's the founder of the Gentlemen's and Ladies Club programs, which was a program that was featured on the Oprah Winfrey Show. And he's the CEO and president of the Peters Group, a national education consulting company. I want to know, in your opinion, have public schools held up their end of the bargain when it comes to educating our children? Please explain.
Well, I think it's difficult to hold public education and public schools responsible for the demise of what's happening right now, because there have been so many structural changes to what we consider a public school student. When I was growing up, we didn't have money, but when we went to school, if you got in trouble at school, then when you got home, there was only one version of the story.
Yep.
And that version was the teacher's version. Public schools cannot be held totally responsible when, in fact, you have federal and state statutes that provide guidance, and then you have school boards all over the country. And thank God, in my district, in Lawrence County 55, I would say I have 7 of the best school board members in the world, and I am so grateful for the understanding that they have over, who you hired, why you hired somebody, and empowering people to do their jobs. And so I think there's enough blame to go around, but I am not a person who has the spirit to concentrate in the problem, because it takes too much energy to find solutions. And so I'm interested in aligning with people who are like-minded, who understand that we need to find solutions for our public schools in America. Many of us graduated from these schools, and we're doing okay in life. But, my definition of success changed as I got older. And, it's interesting because children ask you, especially high school students, college students, where I speak on college and university campuses, and say, man, you look like you've made it, but, what is your definition of success? And I shared with them, it's changed over time, and now my definition is, how many other people are you helping become successful? That's success to me, is how many other people are you helping become successful? And I just truly believe that leaves a legacy in our life. When I was talking to somebody, a friend of mine who's an NBA official, very proud of him. He even called the finals, the past 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
And we're doing some work around the country with my gentlemen's clubs, and we were talking about the first year we started, which was, we're celebrating 20 years this year.
God bless.
And the first 30 boys that graduated from college out of our program, 20 out of 30 boys, 24 graduated from college. They were the first in their families to graduate college. And so when I wrote my dissertation for my doctorate, South Carolina State University, I was looking at the impact that the Gentlemen's Club had on the attendance, the behavior, and academic achievement of these young men. And I added them into a pot of 250 African-American males in 5 U.S. cities. And so the more I looked, research did what research does. I was looking for one thing but found another. And here's what I found. Not only did these 24 out of 30 graduate college, not only were they the first in their families to graduate college, but those 24 families are no longer on public assistance or welfare.
Hey, how about that?
And so when we talk about the poverty index, the way we change it and face it head on is using a platform of education. The more educated we are and the more educated our children and grandchildren are, we break that generational cycle of poverty.
We have been speaking with Dr. Stephen Peters. He's a member of the board of directors for the International Literacy Association. He's the founder of the Gentlemen's and Ladies Club programs. This program was also featured on the Oprah Winfrey Show. And he's the CEO and president of the Peters Group, a national education consulting company, and he's very kind enough to give us some of his very valuable time today. Dr. Peters, in closing, please feel free to plug your website or any project or projects that you are involved in.
Well, good. Well, first of all, I'm a Twitter person. I think it's a great way to get free and powerful professional development from people all over the world. It's
Okay.
global. And my Twitter handle is at Stephen G. Peters. Stephen is spelled Stephen, and then it's G. Peters, Peters. My website is www.stephenpetersgroup.com. And I'm presently in the throes of finishing a book for ASCD, Washington, D.C. No published date yet, but I'm thinking probably January, February 2017 that will be a release date, and it's entitled The Turnaround, Effective Lessons for Educators, Turning Struggling Schools into Thriving Schools. And while it alludes to the experience we had this year at OW, it also gives lessons from 3 decades of my working at every level in public education, trying to provide sensible solutions and specific strategies to offset the deficiencies that we face in our public schools.